"Don't touch me there," she begged. Mafia boss smiled. "That's exactly where you tremble." The fluorescent lights of the emergency room hallway hummed with a sound that seemed to drill directly into the base of Emma Lane's skull. It was the frequency of pure exhaustion. She peeled off her latex gloves, the snap of the rubber against her wrist echoing in the sudden quiet of the locker room. Her shift had lasted 12 hours, but it felt like a lifetime of broken bones, fevers, and the specific, hollow look in the eyes of people who had nowhere else to go. Emma leaned her forehead against the cool metal of her locker door and breathed in the scent of antiseptic and floor wax. She was 27 years old, and she felt ancient. Inside her bag, her phone buzzed with a notification she did not need to check to understand. It was likely another email from the student loan servicers, reminding her that the interest on her nursing degree was accruing faster than she could earn the money to pay it down. She changed out of her scrubs and into jeans and a thick sweater, wrapping a scarf tight around her neck. Harborview was not a city that forgave the unprepared. It was a place of sharp edges and steep shadows. And Emma had learned early on that the only way to survive was to keep her head down, do her job, and stay clean. She walked the straight line. She paid her rent on time, even if it meant eating instant noodles for a week. She avoided the bad parts of town. Even though she lived on the border of one, she was invisible, and she liked it that way. Pushing through the heavy double doors of the hospital entrance, she stepped out into the pre-dawn gray. A cold drizzle was falling, slicking the pavement and turning the city lights into blurred streaks of neon. The bus stop was 3 blocks away, but the schedule was unreliable at 4 a.m. Emma tightened her grip on her purse and started walking, to save 10 minutes. She cut through the alley behind La Notte. It was a trendy nightclub that drew the kind of crowd Emma only saw in magazines, men in Italian suits and women with diamonds that caught the light even in the dimmest corners. At this hour, the club was silent. The bass that usually thumped through the brick walls replaced by the steady rhythm of the rain drumming against metal dumpsters. Steam rose from the vents, curling around her ankles like fog. Emma kept her eyes on the puddle-strewn ground, navigating the uneven cobblestones. She was halfway through the narrow passage when her boot hit something soft. She stumbled, catching herself on a wet brick wall, and looked down. A man was slumped against the side of a dumpster, his legs sprawled out into the alleyway. He was dressed in a suit that cost more than her car, charcoal gray, tailored to perfection, though now it was ruined by the rain and the dark stains spreading across his left side. Emma froze. Her first instinct, the one born of living in Harborview her entire life, was to run. You did not stop for bodies in alleys. You kept walking and pretended you saw nothing. But then the man groaned, a low, ragged sound of pain, and the nurse in her overrode the survivalist. She dropped to her knees beside him, disregarding the filthy water soaking into her jeans. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. The man's head lolled forward, then snapped up as he forced his eyes open. They were dark, focused with a terrifying intensity despite his condition. His face was pale, his jaw set hard. Emma's eyes scanned him quickly. She saw the expensive leather shoes, the heavy gold watch, and then, lying just inches from his right hand, the matte black shape of a semi-automatic pistol. The air smelled faintly of ozone and gunpowder, mixing with the metallic tang of blood. Panic flared in her chest. This was not a random mugging. This was professional. She reached into her pocket for her phone, her fingers trembling as she tapped the screen to dial 911. "Don't!" The word was a rasp, but the hand that shot out to grab her wrist was iron hard. Emma gasped, dropping her phone onto the wet pavement. The man's grip was bruising, his fingers locking around her forearm with desperate strength. "Please, let go," Emma stammered, terrified. "You are hurt. You need an ambulance." "No police?" The man gritted out. He coughed, wincing as the movement jarred his side. "No ambulance. If you call them, I am dead. Do you understand?" Emma stared at him. Rainwater dripped from his dark hair onto his forehead. He was handsome in a severe, dangerous way, but right now, he looked like a cornered animal. I cannot just leave you here, she argued, though her voice lacked conviction. You have lost a lot of blood. Then help me, he said, his eyes locking onto hers. Help me off the record. I can pay you. Whatever you want, just get me off the street. Emma looked at the gun on the ground, then back at his face. This was insane. This was how people disappeared. If she helped him, she was an accessory. If she walked away, he would likely die right here in the rain. She looked at the wound again. It was low on the ribs. If it had hit an artery, he would already be dead. It was a through and through, likely missed the vital organs, but he needed stitches and he needed them now. Damn it, she whispered. She pulled her arm free from his grip, but instead of running, she grabbed his good arm. Can you stand? She asked sharply. The man looked at her, a flicker of surprise breaking through the pain in his expression. He nodded once. With a groan of effort, he pushed himself up. Emma wedged her shoulder under his arm, taking his weight. He was heavy, solid muscle and dead weight, and she nearly buckled under him. They stumbled together through the rain, a strange, three-legged beast moving through the shadows. Her apartment was only 2 blocks away, but it felt like miles. Every siren that wailed in the distance made her heart stop. She expected a police cruiser or a black SUV to screech around the corner at any second. The man remained silent, focusing all his energy on putting one foot in front of the other. When they finally reached her building, getting him up the 3 flights of stairs was a nightmare. By the time Emma unlocked her door and dragged him inside, they were both soaked and gasping for air. She kicked the door shut and locked all 3 deadbolts. Kitchen, she ordered, pointing toward the small table that served as her dining room and workspace. Sit. The man collapsed into one of her mismatched wooden chairs. He leaned his head back, closing his eyes as Emma rushed to the bathroom. She returned a moment later with a first aid kit and a bundle of supplies she had inadvertently accumulated in her pockets over the last few months. Packets of sterile gauze, a suture kit, antiseptic, saline. She had never stolen them on purpose. They just ended up in her scrubs, and she was always too tired to put them back. Now, they were going to save a criminal's life. Take off your jacket and shirt, Emma said, snapping on a pair of clean gloves. The man opened his eyes. He watched her for a moment, his gaze uncomfortably direct, before he peeled the ruined jacket off his shoulders. His movements were slow, deliberate. When he unbuttoned his dress shirt and pushed it aside, Emma had to force herself to look only at the wound. He was fit, his torso defined by lean muscle and old scars that told a violent history. The fresh wound was an ugly, angry puncture on his left side, oozing sluggishly. This is going to hurt, she warned him, tearing open an alcohol wipe. I do not have anything for the pain. I will be fine, he said. His voice was smoother now, regaining some of the composure he had lost in the alley. Emma began to clean the wound. She worked with the efficiency of practice, her hands moving surely despite the tremors she felt deep in her stomach. The room was quiet, save for the sound of the rain against the window and the harsh rhythm of his breathing. The proximity was suffocating. In the small kitchen, there was nowhere to hide from his presence. She could feel the heat radiating off his skin, penetrating the thin latex of her gloves. She could smell the expensive cologne he wore, struggling against the scent of copper blood. As she prepared the needle, she felt his eyes on her face. "You are good at this," he observed quietly. "Too good to be living in a place where the front door lock can be picked with a credit card." Emma threaded the needle, refusing to meet his eyes. "I live where I can afford," she said crisply, "and the lock is dead-bolted." He made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had not ended in a wince. "A nurse," he deduced. "You have the hands for it. Steady, gentle." Emma paused, the needle hovering over his skin. "I am doing this so you do not bleed out on my floor," she said. "Do not read into it." She pierced the skin, and his abdominal muscles jerked involuntarily under her fingers. He hissed through his teeth, his hand gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. But he did not pull away. Emma worked quickly, tying off the first stitch. The intimacy of it was unnerving. She was touching him in a way that felt dangerously personal, her fingers brushing his skin, feeling the tension in his body. She tried to retreat into her professional persona, the one that saw bodies as biological machines to be fixed, but it was impossible. He was too present, too intense. "What is your name?" he asked, watching her tie the second stitch. "No names," Emma said immediately. "You leave, and we never saw each other." He studied her profile. "You are afraid. I am smart," she corrected. "I found you in an alley with a gun. I know what that means." "What do you think it means?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave, soft and rough like velvet dragged over gravel. "It means trouble I do not want." Emma tied off the final stitch and snipped the thread. She taped a sterile pad over the wound, smoothing the adhesive down with trembling fingers. "There," she said, stepping back and peeling off her gloves. "That should hold. But you need antibiotics. If it gets infected, my sewing won't matter." A sudden, loud bang erupted from the hallway outside, a neighbor's door slamming shut with the force of a cannon shot, followed by the muffled shouting of an argument. Emma flinched violently, a small gasp escaping her throat. In the high-tension silence of the apartment, the noise sounded like a gunshot. Instinctively, she stepped backward, pressing herself against the table to put her body between the door and the wounded man. It was a foolish, reflexive action, a desire to hide him. The man reacted instantly. He reached out, his hand closing around her waist to steady her as she nearly tripped over her own feet. "Easy," he murmured. For a moment, time seemed to suspend. Emma was frozen, her hands hovering near his chest. He was sitting. She was standing, which put their faces merely inches apart. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark irises. She could feel the warmth of his large hand burning through her sweater, holding her firmly at the waist. His breathing had steadied, but the air between them crackled with a sudden, undeniable charge. It was not gratitude, it was something darker, heavier. He looked at her not as a patient, but as a woman who had just had her hands inside his skin. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. She should pull away. She knew she should. But for 1 second she was paralyzed by the intensity of his focus. Then the shouting in the hallway faded, and the spell broke. Emma jerked back, stumbling slightly as she put distance between them. Her face burned hot. I should get you some water," she stammered, turning toward the sink to hide her flush. She filled a glass, her hands shaking so badly that water sloshed over the rim. When she turned back, the man was buttoning his shirt. He moved stiffly, but the lethal grace she had sensed earlier was returning. He took the glass from her, his fingers brushing hers. The contact sent a jolt of electricity up her arm that she nearly dropped the glass. He drank it in one long swallow and set it down. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick clip of cash. It was a staggering amount, hundreds of dollars, tightly bound. He tossed it onto the table next to the bloody gauze. "That is for your time," he said, "and for the silence." Emma stared at the money. It was more than she made in 2 months. "I do not want your money," she said, hugging her arms around herself. "I just want you to go." "Take it," he insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. He stood up, bracing himself against the table for a moment before straightening to his full height. He towered over her, filling the small kitchen with his presence. "You just saved the most dangerous man in Harborview. At least let him pay his bill." The words hung in the air, cold and heavy. The most dangerous man in Harborview. Emma felt a chill crawl down her spine. He walked toward the door, moving with a surprising lack of sound for someone so large. At the threshold, he paused. He turned back to look at her one last time. Emma stood by the counter, clutching her own wrist where her glove had slipped earlier, rubbing the faint, white line of an old scar she usually kept hidden under her watch. It was a nervous habit, one she did subconsciously when she was anxious. The man's gaze dropped to her hands. He looked at the scar, his eyes narrowing slightly with curiosity. He took a step back toward her, reaching out as if to inspect it. Emma's reaction was visceral. She jerked her hand away, tucking it behind her back, her eyes wide with panic. "Don't touch me there," she blurts out, her voice shaking uncontrollably. The man froze. His hand hovered in the air for a second before he slowly lowered it. He looked at her face, reading the genuine fear in her eyes, the defensive posture of her body. He did not apologize. He did not ask why. Instead, a faint, cryptic smile touched the corners of his mouth. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who stored information for later use. Noted. "Nurse," he said softly. He turned and walked out the door, disappearing into the gray dawn as if he had never been there at all. Emma locked the door behind him, throwing all 3 bolts. She leaned against the wood, her legs finally giving out, and slid down to the floor. She sat there for a long time, listening to the rain, staring at the stack of cash on her table. That evening, after a fitful few hours of sleep, Emma sat on her worn-out sofa with a mug of tea, watching the local news. She needed noise to drown out the memory of the morning. The news anchor's voice was professional and detached. Reports of a gang confrontation early this morning in the downtown district near the nightclub Lynott. Police found evidence of a shootout, but no suspects were apprehended. Authorities are asking anyone with information to come forward. A photo flashed on the screen. It was grainy, taken from a surveillance camera or a bystander's phone, but the face was unmistakable. It was the man from her kitchen, the man whose blood she had scrubbed off her floor. The caption beneath the photo read, "Adrian Russo, suspected head of the Russo crime family." Emma's tea went cold in her hands. She had not just helped a random criminal. She had stitched up a warlord. She had brought the city's most notorious monster into her sanctuary, put her hands on him, and let him walk away. She looked at the door, paranoid that it would burst open at any second. The weight of what she had done settled onto her shoulders like a lead vest. She had crossed a line she could never uncross, and somewhere out there... Adrian Russo was thinking about the nurse who lived in the cheap apartment with the 3 locks on her door. For the next 5 days, Emma Lane tried to convince herself that the night of the rainstorm had been a hallucination induced by exhaustion. She threw herself into her shifts at Harborview General, picking up overtime, taking the cases no one else wanted, and burying her mind in the rhythmic, predictable chaos of the emergency room. Blood. She understood. Broken bones. She could set. But the memory of a man with eyes like dark glass and a gun on her kitchen floor was something she could not sanitize. Despite her best efforts to pretend her life was normal, a cold prickle of paranoia began to settle at the base of her neck. It started small. A glance over her shoulder while walking to the bus stop, a hesitation before unlocking her apartment door. Then she noticed the car. It was a black sedan, sleek and nondescript, with tinted windows that swallowed the light. It was parked across the street from her building on Tuesday morning when she left for work. It was there again on Wednesday evening when she returned. On Thursday, it was gone. But the absence felt heavier than the presence, as if the watcher had simply moved to a better vantage point. Emma told herself she was being ridiculous. She was a tired nurse with 6-figure student debt and a caffeine addiction, not a person of interest to the criminal underworld. Adrian Russo had paid her. He had left. The transaction was complete, but on Friday night, the illusion of safety shattered. Her shift ended at 2 a.m. The city was asleep, wrapped in a damp fog that muffled the streetlights. Emma walked to the bus stop, her sneakers splashing quietly on the wet pavement. She was alone, or so she thought, until the sound of footsteps behind her fell into a synchronized rhythm with her own. Emma sped up. The footsteps sped up. She gripped her purse strap, her knuckles turning white, and took a sharp right turn toward a bodega that usually stayed open late, hoping for lights and people. But the shop was dark, the metal grate pulled down tight. Panic flared in her chest. She spun around, intending to run back toward the main road, but 2 men stepped out from the shadows of a recessed doorway, blocking her path. They were not the polished, suit-wearing type she had seen in the alley with Adrian. These men were rougher, wearing heavy canvas jackets and smelling of stale tobacco. One was tall and gaunt, the other stocky with a scar running through his eyebrow. Wallet and phone, the stocky one said. He held a knife, not brandishing it wildly, but holding it low against his thigh with practiced ease. Emma's breath hitched. She reached for her bag, her hands trembling. "Take it," she said, her voice tight. "Just take it." The gaunt man stepped closer, ignoring the bag. He tilted his head, studying her face under the flickering streetlight. "Wait a second," he said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "You are the girl from the flats. We heard about you." Emma froze. "What?" "Word is out on the street," the man continued, taking another step. "Someone got patched up real nice when they should have been dead. They say there is a nurse in this neighborhood who is good with blood." The blood drained from Emma's face. It was not a robbery. It was an interrogation. "Who is asking?" Emma whispered, backing away until her spine hit the cold brick of the closed shop. "People who pay better than a hospital," the stocky man said, stepping forward. "Why don't you come with us? We have a friend who wants to know exactly who you stitched up." He reached out, grabbing her upper arm. His grip was bruising, fingers digging into her bicep through her coat. Emma gasped and tried to jerk away, but he was too strong. "Let go of me," she shouted, panic rising to a scream. The man laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Before he could drag her a single step, the roar of an engine tore through the quiet street. High-intensity headlights blinded them, flooding the alley with stark white illumination. Tires screeched against the asphalt as a car swerved to a halt just feet away from them. It was not the black sedan she had seen earlier. This was a silver luxury car, aggressive and low to the ground. The doors flew open before the car had fully stopped. Two men in dark suits exited the vehicle with military precision. They did not shout, they did not hesitate. In 2 seconds, they had crossed the distance. One of them kicked the knife out of the stocky man's hand with a sickening crack of bone meeting wrist, while the other shoved the gaunt man against the brick wall, pressing the barrel of a silencer into his cheek. Emma stumbled back, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack a rib. Then, the rear door of the car opened. Adrian Russo stepped out. He looked different than he had in her kitchen. There was no blood, no pain, no vulnerability. He was dressed in a pristine navy suit, his posture impeccable, radiating a terrifying, icy calm. He adjusted his cuffs as he walked toward them, his shoes clicking softly on the pavement. He stopped in front of the man holding his wrist, who was now whimpering on his knees. Adrian looked down at him with an expression of mild boredom, as if he were inspecting a stain on a carpet. "I believe," Adrian said, his voice quiet and smooth, "that you are bothering my staff." The thug looked up, eyes wide with recognition and terror. "Mr. Russo, we didn't know. We swear. Now you know," Adrian said. He signaled to his men with a slight tilt of his head. They released the attackers, who scrambled backward, tripping over themselves to get away. "Run," Adrian said softly. They ran. Silence descended on the alley, heavy and suffocating. Emma stood pressed against the wall, her chest heaving, staring at Adrian. He turned to her, his expression shifting from lethal coldness to something unreadable. "Are you hurt?" he asked. The adrenaline in Emma's system curdled into anger. She pushed herself off the wall, her fear converting into fury. "What is going on?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "Who were they? Why are you here?" Adrian sighed, a short exhale through his nose. He gestured toward the open door of his car. "Get in. Emma, we cannot talk here. I'm not going anywhere with you," she snapped. "You are the reason this is happening. They said they heard I was good with blood. They knew." "Emma," Adrian said, his voice hardening slightly. "Look around you. You are shaking. Get in the car before you fall down." She hated that he was right. Her knees felt like water. Scowling, she marched past him and slid into the leather back seat. Adrian followed, closing the door and sealing them in a soundproof bubble of luxury. As the car pulled away, merging smoothly into the night traffic, Emma turned on him. "You said you would pay for the silence." She accused. "You gave me money. You left. Why are people chasing me with knives?" Adrian rested his elbow on the armrest, rubbing his temple. "I underestimated the grapevine," he admitted. Looking at her, "I disappeared for 6 hours with a bullet in my side. When I reappeared, stitched up and alive, People started asking questions. My enemies are thorough. They figured out I did not go to a hospital. They started looking for local medical professionals in the area where my car was last seen. He paused, his dark eyes locking onto hers. You are a loose end. Emma? And in my world, people pull on loose ends to see what unravels. Emma felt sick. She sank back into the leather seat, staring out the window at the passing city lights. So that is it? She asked, her voice hollow. I am a target now? Because I helped you? Yes, Adrian said simply. She whipped her head back to face him. How can you be so calm about this? You ruined my life. I am not calm, Adrian said, and for a second the mask slipped. His eyes flashed with genuine frustration. Why do you think I've had a car watching your apartment for 3 days? I have been trying to figure out how to clean up this mess without getting you killed. So you were watching me, she whispered. I was protecting you, he corrected. Clearly, I did not do a good enough job. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Emma flinched, but he only pulled out a silver cigarette case. He did not open it. He just turned it over in his fingers. A nervous tick. I have a solution, he said. I do not want your solutions. Emma said, I want my life back. That is no longer an option, Adrian said brutally. You can't go back to being invisible. They know you exist, so we have to hide you in plain sight. He turned his body toward her. I want you to work for me. Emma let out a short, incredulous laugh. Work for you? Doing what? Sewing up your henchmen in the back of a warehouse? No, Adrian said. Lynott is a legitimate business. The nightclub makes millions legally. I need an administrative assistant for the front office. And, strictly off the books, I need a medic on call. Someone I trust. Trust? Emma repeated. You do not know me. I know you didn't call the cops when you had a gun on your floor, Adrian countered. I know you have steady hands. And I know you need money. Emma opened her mouth to argue, but the words died in her throat. She thought of the overdue notices on her counter. She thought of the 2 men in the alley. If you work for me, Adrian continued, his voice softer now, persuasive, you are under my protection. No one touches my employees. You come to the club, you do your work, you go home in a secure car, you pay off your debts, and when the heat dies down in a few months, you walk away. He held her gaze, offering her a lifeline that looked suspiciously like a shackle. It is safer than the bus stop. Emma, he added quietly. Emma looked at her hands, still trembling in her lap. She hated that he was right. She hated that she felt safer in this car with a mob boss than she did on her own street. Fine, she whispered. Defeated, part-time. Just until things settle down and strictly professional. I answer phones and I bandage cuts. I do not do whatever else you do. Adrian nodded, a faint ghost of a smile touching his lips. Strictly professional, he agreed. 2 nights later, Emma walked through the employee entrance of Lynott. The transition from the quiet alley to the interior of the club was like stepping into a different universe. The air vibrated with the heavy thrum of bass that she could feel in her teeth. Lights swept across the cavernous main floor in waves of violet and gold. It was beautiful, chaotic, and terrifying. She had expected a den of thieves, a smoky room full of men cleaning guns. Instead, she found a highly organized machine. She watched Adrian from the balcony of the 2nd floor as he moved through the crowd. He was the center of gravity in the room. Employees straightened their spines when he passed, not just out of fear, but out of a sharp, clear respect. She saw him stop by the main bar, leaning in to speak to a bartender. Emma braced herself, expecting a reprimand. Instead, she saw the bartender smile and nod, and Adrian clapped the man on the shoulder. Later, she learned he had been asking about the man's sick mother and had approved paid time off for him to take her to a specialist. It was confusing. He was a monster who had threatened men in an alleyway. Yet he ran his business with a strange, protective loyalty. Later that night, a fight broke out on the edge of the dance floor. 2 men, fueled by too much expensive vodka, began shoving each other, knocking over a table of drinks. The music did not stop, but the crowd pulled back, creating a circle of tension. Security started to move in. Massive men with earpieces, but Adrian held up a hand. He walked into the center of the circle himself. He did not shout. He did not pull a weapon. He simply stepped between the two furious men and spoke. Emma could not hear what he said over the music, but she saw the effect. He placed a hand on the aggressor's chest. Not a push, just a touch. He said something low, his face perfectly calm. The man's face went from red-hot rage to pale realization. He nodded, mumbled something that looked like an apology, and allowed security to escort him out without a struggle. Adrian fixed his suit jacket, signaled for a busboy to clean the glass, and the party resumed as if nothing had happened, lethal authority, wrapped in silk. Emma retreated to the office suite on the 3rd floor, her heart beating a little faster. The office was a sanctuary. Soundproof glass muffled the club's pounding beat to a distant hum. The carpet was thick, the furniture mahogany and leather. It smelled of espresso and the faint, woodsy scent of Adrian's cologne. The door opened, and Adrian walked in. He looked tired. The first crack in his armor she had seen all night. He loosened his tie as he shut the door, locking out the chaos. "So," he said, leaning back against the edge of his massive desk and crossing his ankles, "the first shift. Are you running for the hills yet?" Emma stood by the filing cabinet she had been organizing. She looked at him, seeing the way the dim lamplight cast shadows over his sharp cheekbones. "It is loud," she admitted. "It pays the bills," Adrian said dryly. "It is intense," Emma corrected. "I watched you downstairs. With the fight," Adrian shrugged. "Violence is bad for business, Emma. Broken glass costs money. Blood stains the upholstery. It is better to talk." "You are good at it," she said, the compliment slipping out before she could check it. "Being in control." He looked at her then, his gaze heavy. "Control is the only thing that keeps us alive," he said. He pushed off the desk and walked toward her. He did not come too close, stopping a respectful distance away, but the air in the room suddenly felt thinner. "You're doing well." "Emma," he said softly, "my team likes you. You are organized. You don't ask stupid questions. I'm just trying to survive," she said, her voice sounding breathless to her own ears. "Survival looks good on you," he murmured. The moment stretched, taut as a violin string. The professional distance they had agreed upon felt flimsy, like paper holding back a flood. Suddenly, the office door burst open. Emma jumped. Spinning around, a man stumbled in, laughing loudly. He was young, wealthy, and clearly wasted. He held a half-empty champagne glass in one hand. "Where is the bathroom in this place?" he slurred, blinking blearily at them. Adrian's expression instantly shifted from warm to glacial. "Private office," Adrian said, his voice flat. "Get out!" The man ignored him. His eyes landed on Emma. "Well, hello?" He grinned, stumbling forward. "You are a pretty little thing. Are you on the menu tonight?" He reached out, his clammy hand grabbing Emma's bare forearm. Emma flinched, pulling back, but his grip was clumsy and tight. "Hey, do not be shy." The man laughed when pulling her toward him. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees, in a blur of motion. Adrian was there. He did not strike the man. He simply gripped the man's wrist, the one holding Emma, and twisted. It was a precise, calculated movement. The man yelped, his fingers springing open. Adrian shoved him back, stepping between him and Emma. "Do not," Adrian said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. "Touch her." The man rubbed his wrist, looking offended. "Do you know who my father is? I spend $5,000 a night in this dump. I do not care if you spend $5 million, Adrian said. "You touched my staff. You are done. Banned for life." He pressed a button on his desk phone. 2 seconds later, the door opened and 2 security guards filled the frame. "Take him out," Adrian ordered. "If he comes back, break his legs." The guards grabbed the man by the arms and dragged him out, ignoring his shouting threats. The door clicked shut, sealing the silence back in. Emma stood by the filing cabinet, clutching her arm where the man had grabbed her. Her heart was racing, a frantic staccato against her ribs. The adrenaline dump was severe. Her knees felt shaky, and a tremor ran through her hands. Adrian turned to her. The cold mask vanished, replaced by immediate concern. "Did he hurt you?" he asked, stepping closer. "No," Emma managed to say. She tried to laugh. A brittle, nervous sound. Just startled me. "I'm fine. Just a drunk idiot." She tried to smooth her skirt, to look professional, but her hands wouldn't cooperate. They were shaking visibly. Adrian didn't buy it. He took a step closer, invading her personal space in a way that felt completely different from the drunk man. This was not predatory. It was gravitational. "You are not fine," he said softly. He reached out, his hand hovering near her shoulder, not making contact but close enough that she could feel the heat of his palm. "You are still trembling," he observed. Emma looked up at him. His eyes were dark pools, searching her face. He seemed fascinated by her fear, or perhaps by her fragility. Slowly, incredibly slowly, his hand moved. He did not touch her skin. He let his fingers drift down through the air, tracing the line of her body without making contact, until his hand hovered directly over the center of her chest, right over her racing heart. He was close enough that she could smell the expensive scotch on his breath, close enough to count his eyelashes. The magnetic pull between his hand and her heart felt physical, a tug that made her breath catch. "Don't touch me there," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It was a plea, but she wasn't sure what she was begging for him to stop, or for him to save her from wanting him to continue. Adrian paused. His eyes locked on hers, intense and knowing. A soft, devastating smile curved his lips. "That's exactly where you tremble." "Emma," he murmured. The words hung between them, heavy with a double meaning that made Emma's blood rush to her face. He knew. He could see the effect he had on her, the way her body betrayed her resolve. He held her gaze for 1 second longer, letting the tension coil tight in the pit of her stomach, before he slowly lowered his hand and stepped back, leaving her standing there, breathless and burning, in the quiet safety of the lion's den. The divide between Emma Lane's 2 lives was becoming a blur of gray exhaustion. By day, she was the competent, over-caffeinated trauma nurse at Harborview General, her shoes squeaking on linoleum stained with the misery of the city. By night, she was the ghost in the machine of Lanaut, organizing ledgers and patching up knuckles in the back office of a criminal empire. It had been 3 weeks since she accepted Adrian Russo's offer. She told herself every morning, as she scrubbed her face with cold water, that this was temporary. She was doing it to pay off the debt, to keep herself safe from the shadows that had threatened her in the alley. But as the days bled into nights, Emma found herself looking forward to the moment she stepped into the black sedan that waited for her after her hospital shift. It was a terrifying realization. She was feeling safer in the passenger seat of a mob boss's car than she did in her own apartment. This cognitive dissonance was made worse by the fact that Adrian was not the monster she wanted him to be. It would have been easier if he were cruel. If he were cold and heartless, she could have kept her emotional walls reinforced with steel. But Adrian was complicated. One Tuesday evening, the driver, a silent man named Marco, took a detour on the way to the club. They pulled up to the wrought iron gates of St. Jude's Cemetery. "We have a stop," Marco said. Emma watched from the tinted window as Adrian's other car pulled up ahead. He stepped out, not wearing his usual sharp suit jacket, but in a black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He carried a bouquet of white lilies. Curiosity got the better of her. When they arrived at the club later, and Adrian was busy on the floor, she asked Marco about it, his sister. Marco said, his voice lowering out of respect. "She died 10 years ago. He goes every week. Rain or shine. He never misses a Tuesday." Emma watched Adrian that night from the glass wall of the office. He was laughing with a group of investors, looking for all the world like a king holding court. But now she saw the shadow in his eyes. He was a man who visited ghosts. 2 nights later, she was organizing invoices in the office when she overheard a conversation in the hallway. A young waitress, a girl named Sarah, who couldn't be older than 20, was crying softly. "I don't know what to do. Mr. Russo," Sarah sobbed. "The hospital says they will send it to collections. My mom needs the surgery." Emma moved to the door, cracking it open just an inch. Adrian was standing there, handing Sarah a handkerchief. "Give me the bill," Adrian said quietly, "but it is $5,000. Sarah wept. "Give me the bill," he repeated, his voice gentle but firm, "and tell your mother she is covered. We look after our own here." Emma closed the door silently, her heart doing a traitorous flip in her chest. He was buying loyalty, she told herself. That was all. It was a strategy. But the way he had looked at the crying girl, with a total lack of impatience, suggested otherwise. Then there were the nights when the club closed. She watched him personally escort intoxicated female patrons to waiting taxis, taking down the medallion numbers of the cabs and telling the drivers, "I know your number. Get her home safe, or I will come find you." He was a protector, a violent, dangerous, criminal protector, and Emma was terrified to find that she wanted to be close to him. The fragile piece of her routine shattered on a Friday night. The club was packed, the bass shaking the floorboards, when a roar of anger erupted near the main bar. A glass shattered, followed by a sickening thud. Emma was in the office when the door flew open. Marco dragged a man inside, Leo, the head bartender. Leo was clutching a towel to his forearm, and the white terry cloth was rapidly turning red. "The Varela crew," Marco spat, his face pale. One of their runners started a fight. He smashed a vodka bottle on the counter. Leo got caught in the spray. Adrian was right behind them, his face a mask of controlled fury. But when he saw the blood, he looked instantly to Emma. "Can you handle this?" he asked. "Or do we need a hospital?" Emma snapped into professional mode instantly. The fear vanished, replaced by the cold clarity of triage. She pulled Leo's arm toward her, peeling back the soaked towel. It was a nasty gash, long and jagged, but it had missed the major arteries. "I can stitch it," she said, "but I need better light. The lamp in here is too dim." "Bring him to the supply room," Adrian ordered. "There is a work table there." They moved quickly into the back room, a narrow space filled with crates of liquor and linens. The overhead bulb flickered and died the moment they flipped the switch. "Damn it," Adrian hissed. He pulled a heavy-duty tactical flashlight from his belt and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. "Hold this," Emma commanded, pointing to the wound. "Steady." Adrian moved to the other side of the table. He held the light exactly where she needed it, his hand rock steady. Emma worked quickly, cleaning the wound with antiseptic. Leo hissed in pain, gripping the edge of the table. "Sorry, Leo, almost done," Emma murmured. She reached for the gauze, but it was out of reach. Adrian saw her movement and grabbed the packet, tearing it open with his teeth before handing it to her. Their fingers brushed as she took it. The contact was brief, but in the dark, quiet room, it felt electric. "Hold pressure here," she said, guiding his other hand to the wound while she threaded the suture needle. Adrian obeyed. He pressed down, his large hand dwarfing her own. For the next 10 minutes, they worked in a synchronized rhythm. He anticipated her needs, handing her scissors, more gauze, tape, without her having to ask. It was an intimacy born of adrenaline and blood, a silent language they both spoke fluently. When the last stitch was tied and Leo was bandaged, Emma finally exhaled. "You are good." "Leo," she said, patting the bartender's shoulder. "Go home. Keep it dry." Marco helped to pale Leo out of the room, leaving Emma and Adrian alone in the dark, lit only by the beam of the flashlight Adrian had set on a crate. Emma slumped against the table, the adrenaline crash hitting her hard. She wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist, realizing her hands were shaking. "Come on," Adrian said softly. He led her out of the supply room and back up to his private office. He didn't turn on the overhead lights. The only illumination came from the city skyline sprawling outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a grid of gold and white lights against the velvet black of the night. Adrian went to the crystal decanter on the shelf and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a glass. He walked over to where Emma was standing by the window and held it out. "Drink," he said. "It will stop the shaking." Emma took the glass. It was scotch, smooth and smoky, burning pleasantly on its way down. She took a deep breath, watching her reflection in the glass of the window. "You were incredible back there," Adrian said. He was leaning against his desk, his arms crossed, watching her. "Most people freeze when they see that much blood. I see it every day," Emma said quietly. "It is just plumbing. Pipes and pressure." Adrian tilted his head. "You say it like it is mechanical. But I saw your face. You were talking to him. You were gentle." He pushed off the desk and walked slowly toward her. He stopped a foot away, close enough that she could smell the soap on his skin and the metallic tang of the adrenaline that still clung to him. He reached out and gently took her wrist, the one with the watch, the one she always guarded. Emma tensed, her instinct to pull away flaring up, but Adrian didn't pull. He just held her hand, his thumb brushing over the pulse point. He slid his finger under the band of her watch, touching the white scar line she kept hidden. "Tell me about this," he said. "And do not tell me you fell." Emma looked at the city lights, blurring slightly as tears pricked her eyes. The whiskey had loosened her tongue. Or maybe it was just the exhaustion. Maybe she was tired of carrying the weight alone. "My mother died 3 years ago." She whispered, "Cancer. It was slow, ugly. I spent every penny we had trying to save her. I dropped out of nursing school for a semester to care for her." She took a shaky breath. "When she died, I was alone. I had no money, no family, just debt, and a silence in the apartment that was so loud I couldn't sleep." She looked down at her wrist, at Adrian's thumb tracing the old wound. "I was tired. Adrian, I was just so tired. I didn't want to wake up anymore. So I tried not to." The confession hung in the air, heavy and raw. She had never told anyone that, not her coworkers, not her friends. It was the source of her shame, the reason she fought so hard to be perfect, to be strong. She waited for him to judge her, to tell her she was weak. Instead, Adrian moved. He reached up, his movement slow and deliberate, giving her every chance to back away. He tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against the curve of her cheek. His skin was warm, rough with calluses, but his touch was feather-light. "You are not weak," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "You are still here. You fought your way back." He stepped closer, invading her space, but she didn't retreat. "You are stronger than anyone I know. Emma, including me." Emma looked up at him. His eyes were dark, searching hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. The walls she had built, the professional distance, the judgment, the fear, were crumbling. She was tired of being sensible. She was tired of being alone. She took a step closer to him. "Emma," he warned, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "Be careful. I am tired of being careful," she said. "Men like me," Adrian said, his hand cupping her jaw, his thumb brushing her lower lip, "do not get happy endings. We destroy the things we touch. I will drag you down. Then let me decide that," she whispered. "I am old enough to make my own mistakes." She looked at his mouth. The invitation was undeniable. Adrian let out a low groan, a sound of defeated resistance, and lowered his head. The kiss was tentative at first, a question, a testing of boundaries. His lips were soft, surprisingly so, tasting of scotch and danger. Emma let out a small sigh, her hands coming up to grip the lapels of his shirt, bunching the fabric in her fists. That small sound seemed to snap something inside him. The kiss deepened, shifting from a question to a claim. Adrian's other hand came up to frame her face, holding her like she was made of precious, fragile glass. He tilted her head back, angling for better access, and Emma melted against him. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was messy and desperate. It was the collision of two lonely people who had found a matching frequency in the static. Emma felt a tremor run through Adrian's body, a vibration that matched the shaking in her own limbs. She arched her back, pressing closer to him, needing to feel the solidity of his chest against hers. The heat between them spiked, a sudden flare of desire that was sharp and achy. Adrian's hand slid from her face down her neck, over her shoulder, and down her spine. He pulled her hips against his, and his hand continued to slide lower, resting firmly on her waist and tugging her flush against him. Panic, sharp and cold, pierce through the haze of desire. It was an instinctive reaction, a phantom memory of trauma and loss of control. Emma gasped, her body going rigid. She pulled back sharply, breaking the kiss, her breath coming in ragged heaps. "I can't," she started, her eyes wide. Adrian stopped instantly. He didn't try to hold her. He didn't ask what was wrong. He simply froze, his hands staying exactly where they were but losing all pressure, becoming safe. Static points of contact. He leaned his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. His breathing was just as ragged as hers. "It is okay," he whispered. "You are okay." He waited until she took a breath, then another. "I won't cross any line you do not want me to." "Emma," he promised, his voice low and fierce. "When you say stop, I stop. Every single time. Your no matters more than anything I want." The tension drained out of Emma's shoulders. He wasn't angry. He wasn't pushing. He was giving her the control she so desperately needed. "Thank you," she breathed. She relaxed, leaning back into him. And this time, the fear didn't return. She tilted her head up, and he kissed her again. This time, it was softer. It was an exploration. They stood in the center of the office, bathed in the city glow, kissing with a slow, deliberate tenderness that felt more intimate than anything physical. They were mapping each other's sorrow, tasting the loneliness they had both carried for so long. They didn't go home that night. They ended up on the leather Chesterfield sofa in the corner of the office. There was no grand undressing, no desperate scramble for skin. They simply lay down together, fully clothed. Adrian lay on his back, one arm thrown over his eyes, and Emma curled up beside him, fitting her body into the curve of his side. He draped his other arm over her, a heavy, protective weight. She could feel the steady thump of his heart against her ear. It was a strong, slow rhythm, a living thing. For the first time in 3 years, the silence in her mind was gone, replaced by the sound of his breathing. Emma fell asleep before she could overthink it. The next morning, the sun cut through the blinds with a brutal, exposing brightness. Emma woke up first. For a disorienting second, she didn't know where she was. Then she felt the warmth beside her and the smell of expensive cologne and scotch. Memory rushed back. The kiss, the couch, the feeling of safety. She sat up, panic rising again. What had she done? She was a nurse. He was a crime boss. This wasn't a romance novel. This was a felony in progress. Adrian stirred, opening one eye. He looked at her, his hair messy, the stubble on his jaw dark. "Stop thinking so loud," he grumbled, his voice rough with sleep. "We can't do this," Emma said, standing up and smoothing her wrinkled clothes. "We can't be serious. Adrian, you run a criminal empire. I save lives. We are opposites." Adrian sat up, rubbing his face. He didn't argue. He didn't try to charm her. "I know," he said. "Then this has to stop," she said, though the words tasted like ash in her mouth. "Okay," he said. But over the next 3 days, the line Emma had tried to draw in the sand was washed away by the tide. They didn't talk about it. They maintained a veneer of professionalism in front of the staff. But the air between them had changed. When they passed each other in the hallway, their arms would brush, a lingering contact that lasted a second too long. When he handed her a file, his fingers would graze hers, sending a jolt of awareness straight to her core. Across the crowded club floor, she would catch him looking at her. He wouldn't look away. He would hold her gaze, a small, private smile playing on his lips, a look that said, "I know you. I know how you tremble." And Emma, despite her better judgment, despite the warning screaming in her head, would smile back. The line was not just blurring, it was gone, and she was standing on the wrong side of it, waiting for the fall. The atmosphere inside La Notte had shifted. It was no longer just a nightclub. It was a fortress disguised in velvet and neon. Emma Lane felt the change in the air pressure the moment she walked through the service entrance on a rainy Tuesday. For the past week, the shadows in the hallways seemed deeper, the silence between the staff heavier. The Varela crew, A rival organization that had previously been nothing more than a rumor on the wind was pushing aggressively into Adrian's territory. The consequences were visible in the tightening of jaws and the subtle, metallic click of safeties being checked behind closed doors. Emma noticed the difference in the security detail first. The usual bouncers, men she had come to know by name, were now flanked by harder, colder men she did not recognize. They wore earpieces and stood with the rigid posture of soldiers expecting an ambush. They watched everyone, even her, with suspicious eyes until Marco or Adrian waved them down. But the biggest change was in Adrian himself. He was present but distant, during her shifts in the office, answering the legitimate business emails or organizing the payroll. Emma would hear him on the phone in the adjacent room. His voice, usually a smooth baritone that commanded respect without raising volume, had developed a serrated edge. Make them understand, she heard him say one night, his voice low and vibrating through the wall. If they cross 5th Street again, I will not send a warning. I will send a hearse. Emma had frozen, her hand hovering over the keyboard. The violence of his world, which she had managed to keep at arm's length, was bleeding through the drywall. One evening, Emma arrived at the club late. A trauma case at the hospital had run over, a multi-car pileup that left her exhausted and smelling of antiseptic soap. She walked up the back stairs to the executive suite, hoping to just put in her hours and maybe catch a glimpse of Adrian that didn't involve death threats. As she reached the top landing, she heard shouting. It was coming from Adrian's office. The door was slightly ajar, letting the heated voices spill out into the corridor. She is a liability. Adrian, it was Marco. Emma had never heard the lieutenant raise his voice to his boss before. Marco was usually the picture of calm loyalty, but now he sounded desperate. She is not a part of this discussion, Adrian replied, his tone icy and final. She is the center of this discussion, Marco argued, the sound of a hand slamming against a desk echoing through the hall. Varela knows. The word is out on the street that the boss has a soft spot. They are not going to come for the shipments. Adrian, they are going to come for the nurse. Emma stopped breathing. She stood frozen in the hallway, her hand clutching the strap of her purse. She is under my protection, Adrian growled. Protection isn't enough when you are at war, Marco shot back. She is a weakness. As long as she is walking around exposed, living in that flimsy apartment, she's a target painted on your back. You are distracted. You are making mistakes because you are looking over your shoulder at her instead of at the enemy. Silence followed. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that hurt worse than the shouting. Then, Adrian spoke, his voice barely a whisper, yet clear enough to shatter Emma's heart. I know. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. She was a weakness, a liability, a distraction. She didn't wait to hear the rest. She pushed the door open, the heavy wood swinging inward with a creak that announced her presence. Both men spun around. Marco looked guilty, his eyes darting to the floor. Adrian looked devastated. He was standing behind his desk, his tie loosened, looking more tired than she had ever seen him. Emma, he said, the name sounding like a plea. Marco. Leave us, Emma said. Her voice was steady, surprising even herself. Marco looked at Adrian, who gave a single, sharp nod. The lieutenant grabbed his jacket and walked past Emma, murmuring a quiet apology that she ignored. The door clicked shut, leaving them alone in the expansive, dimly lit office. So that is what I am, Emma said, walking further into the room. A weakness. Adrian came around the desk. He reached out a hand, but she stepped back, putting distance between them. You were not supposed to hear that. He said, no. I suppose I was just supposed to wait until someone put a gun to my head to figure it out. She snapped. The exhaustion of the hospital shift and the fear of the last few weeks collided, sparking a fire of anger in her chest. Is that what you think of me? She demanded. A soft spot? Something that makes you weak? No, Adrian said, his voice rough. You are the only thing that makes me feel human, and that terrifies me. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. This time, when she tried to step back, she hit the edge of the leather sofa and had nowhere to go. "They are right, Emma," he admitted, looking down at her with tormented eyes. "You are a target because of me, because I was selfish enough to keep you close. Then let me go," she challenged, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Fire me, tell me to leave." "I can't," he whispered. "It is too late for that." The air between them crackled. It was the same tension that had been building for weeks, the magnetic pull of the kitchen, the shared silence in the car, the intimacy of the makeshift clinic. But now, fueled by adrenaline and fear, it was volatile. Emma looked up at him. She saw the lines of stress around his eyes, the burden of command weighing down his shoulders, and the raw, terrified love he was trying to suppress. She didn't want to leave. God help her. She didn't want to be safe if it meant being away from him. "Then stop trying to push me away," she said. She reached out, grabbing the lapels of his shirt in her fists, and pulled him down. It was an act of defiance. It was a claim. Adrian let out a sound that was half groan, half growl. His resistance shattered. He crashed his mouth down on hers, and the kiss was nothing like the gentle, tentative exploration they had shared before. This was desperate. It was a collision of need and fear. Emma opened to him, meeting his intensity with her own. She tasted the coffee on his breath, felt the scratch of his stubble against her chin. His hands came up to frame her face, holding her tightly, as if he thought she might vanish if he let go. The momentum carried them backward. Emma stumbled, and Adrian caught her, lifting her effortlessly by the waist. He set her onto the edge of the heavy oak desk, sending a stack of files sliding to the floor in a chaotic flutter of paper. Neither of them noticed. Emma wrapped her legs around his waist, pulling him closer, needing to eliminate every millimeter of space between them. Her hands tangled in his hair, gripping the dark strands. Adrian pressed between her knees, his mouth moving over hers with a hunger that made her head spin. He kissed her jaw, her throat, the sensitive spot behind her ear, drawing gasp after gasp from her lips. "You make me crazy," he murmured against her skin, his voice vibrating against her neck. "I cannot think when you are near me." "Good," she whispered breathlessly. "Don't think." His hands traveled down her back, tracing the curve of her spine through the thin fabric of her blouse. His touch was hot, possessive. He molded her body against his strength overwhelming and intoxicating. Then, his hand slid lower. He gripped her hip, his fingers digging in slightly, and began to slide his hand toward her lower back, pulling her harder against him. The movement triggered a reflex Emma couldn't control, a flash of memory, not of him, but of a loss of control, of vulnerability, spiked through her. She tensed. Her body went rigid in his arms, and she flinched, a sharp intake of breath hissing through her teeth. Adrian stopped instantly. The motion was so abrupt, it was jarring. 1 second, they were caught in a whirlwind of passion. The next, he was stone still. He pulled back, just an inch, his heavy breathing mingling with hers. He didn't let go, but his hands shifted. The hand on her lower back moved up, settling safely, gently, at her waist. "Emma," he breathed, his eyes searching hers for signs of fear. "I'm sorry," she whispered, ashamed of the reaction. "I just—" "Shh," he soothed. He leaned his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. He waited until her breathing slowed, until the tension left her muscles. "You never have to apologize for that," he said quietly. He moved his hand on her waist, his thumb rubbing soothing circles against her side. "I can feel where you tremble," he whispered against her cheek. "I know the map of it, I promise you. Emma, I will never go faster than you want. I will never push past the shaking." The raw desire that had filled the room a moment ago transformed into something deeper, something anchoring. It was trust. He had the power to take, but he chose to wait. Emma leaned her head on his shoulder, burying her face in the crook of his neck. "Thank you," she muffled against his collar. They stayed like that for a long time, the city lights casting long shadows across the office floor. When they finally pulled apart, Adrian looked serious again, the boss returning, but his eyes remained soft. "We need to talk about your living situation," he said, keeping his hands on her arms. Emma sighed. hopping off the desk and smoothing her skirt. The reality of the earlier argument came rushing back. "I am not quitting." "Adrian, I know," he said, "but you cannot stay at your apartment. Marco is right about that. The Varela crew has been watching the hospital. They have been watching your building." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "Watching me? I have a place," Adrian said quickly. "A condo in the Heights. It is under a shell company name. Gated entry. 24-hour doorman. Private elevator." He looked at her imploringly. "Move in there. Just until this blows over, it is secure. I have men nearby, but not right on top of you. You will have your independence, but inside a fortress." Emma crossed her arms. "You want to hide me away?" "I want to keep you breathing," he corrected. "Please, Emma, for my sanity." "I have to think about it," she said. She left the club that night feeling conflicted. She valued her independence above everything. Her apartment was small and run down, but it was hers. It was the only thing she owned that didn't have strings attached. But when she got home, the illusion of safety shattered completely. As she walked up the steps to her building, she saw the black sedan again, not Adrian's, it was an older model, idling down the street. When she looked at it, the headlights flicked off, plunging the car into darkness, her heart in her throat. She fumbled with her keys at the front door. Inside the vestibule, she checked her mailbox. The metal door was bent. The lock had been pried open. Inside, it was empty. Someone had been through her mail. Someone knew her bills, her schedule, her life. Emma stood in the dim hallway, the smell of stale cigarettes and old carpet surrounding her. She realized with a sinking certainty that Adrian was right. She wasn't holding on to independence. She was holding on to a target. She went upstairs, double-locked her door, and pulled her suitcase from the closet. She packed efficiently, scrubs, jeans, the sweater Adrian liked, her toiletries. She called Adrian, "Come get me," she said when he answered. The condo was a different world. It was on the 40th floor of a glass needle overlooking the harbor. The floors were polished concrete, the furniture sleek Italian leather. It was beautiful, cold, and entirely impersonal. It looked like a page from a magazine, not a home. But living there changed things between them in ways Emma hadn't anticipated. Adrian didn't just stash her there. He stayed there, too. He argued it was for security, to minimize his own movements. But Emma knew it was because he couldn't stand to be away from her. The domestic intimacy that followed was far more dangerous to her heart than the gunfights. It was in the mornings. Emma would walk into the kitchen, hair messy, wearing oversized pajamas, to find the most feared crime boss in Harborview standing at the espresso machine in a t-shirt and sweatpants, making toast. "Coffee?" he would ask, sliding a mug across the granite island. "Thank you," she would reply, taking a sip. They would eat breakfast together in the quiet light of dawn, reading news on their tablets, sharing the silence. It was mundane. It was normal. And it felt terrifyingly right. It was in the evenings. They would stand side by side at the double vanity in the master bathroom, brushing their teeth. There was something incredibly intimate about the act, the lack of pretense, the routine of it. He would catch her eye in the mirror and wink, toothpaste foam and all, and she would feel a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the heated floors. And then there was the sleeping. The condo had 3 bedrooms, but on the first night, Adrian had stood at the door of the master bedroom, looking uncomfortable. "The security system is hardwired to this room," he had said. "The panic button is by the bed. I need to be in here." "I understand," Emma had said. So they shared the bed. It was a massive California king, big enough that they could sleep without touching. For the first few nights, they stayed on their respective sides, separated by a vast expanse of Egyptian cotton, but gravity, or perhaps magnetism, was inevitable. Each morning, Emma woke up a little closer to the center. Each night, Adrian settled in a little nearer. One rainy Thursday, a week after she moved in, they ordered takeout and ate on the floor of the living room, watching the storm roll over the city. The tension of the Varela War was high. Adrian had spent all day on encrypted calls. But in the condo, the world felt distant. Later, They lay on top of the covers on the bed, fully dressed. Adrian had discarded his jacket, and Emma was wearing yoga pants and a tank top. They were facing each other, the room lit only by the city glow filtering through the sheer curtains. They weren't talking. They were just existing in the same space, letting the proximity soothe the frayed edges of their nerves. Adrian reached out. His hand, large and scarred, moved through the space between them. He didn't grab her. He extended one finger and began to trace the outline of her hand as it rested on the pillow. He traced the length of her thumb, the curve of her knuckles, the delicate bones of her wrist. His touch was hypnotic. He stopped at the inside of her wrist, right over the radial artery. He pressed lightly, feeling the steady, rhythmic thrum of her life. Emma watched his face. He was focused on her pulse as if it were the most fascinating thing in the universe. "You are racing," he murmured, his voice low and vibrating in the quiet room. Emma felt her cheeks heat up. She couldn't help it. His proximity, his scent, the way he treated her body like a holy relic. It did things to her heart rate that she couldn't control physically. "I can't help it," she whispered. Adrian smiled. A small, private thing. He moved his finger in a small circle over her pulse point. "This is where you tremble most," he said softly. "When I am close to you. Right here." He looked up, locking eyes with her. "It tells the truth, Emma, even when you try to be tough." Emma didn't pull away. She didn't hide the scar or the reaction. Instead, she shifted her hand, turning her palm up, and interlaced her fingers with his. She felt his own pulse against her palm. It was steady, strong but slightly elevated. "You're racing too," she noted. Adrian squeezed her hand. "I told you," he said, closing his eyes as he settled his head onto the pillow, their hands resting between them. "You are my weakness." They fell asleep like that, holding hands in the dark, floating high above the city that wanted to tear them apart. The physical boundary of the bed had vanished, replaced by an emotional proximity that was absolute. Emma knew, as she drifted off, that she was no longer just the nurse who saved him. She was the woman who lived in his house, in his bed, and in his heart. And for the first time, she stopped wondering when it would end and started wondering how they would survive it. The city of Harborview was burning, and Emma Lane felt the heat of it even from 40 stories up. For the last 3 days, the local news stations had been running marathon coverage of what they called an escalating gang war. There had been a firebombing at a warehouse in the industrial district, a drive-by shooting in broad daylight 2 streets over from the police precinct. The headlines were screaming about a breakdown in law and order, painting a picture of a city under siege. Emma sat on the edge of the plush sofa in Adrian's condo, clutching a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. On the television screen, shaky helicopter footage showed black smoke billowing into the gray sky. "We believe this is a retaliation strike by the Varela crime syndicate against the Russo organization," the news anchor said, his voice grave. "Tensions between the two factions have reached a boiling point." Emma muted the television. The silence that rushed back into the room was heavy and suffocating. She looked around the apartment, the sleek Italian leather, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the security panel glowing green by the door. It was a fortress, beautiful and impenetrable, but it felt increasingly like a cage built of guilt. She knew why this was happening. The Varela crew was pushing, and Adrian was pushing back. But a small, insidious voice in the back of her mind whispered that the violence was sharper, faster, and more reckless because Adrian was distracted, because he was worried about her, because having a soft spot in a world of hard edges was a liability that got people killed. That afternoon, the sky was the color of a bruised plum as Emma left the hospital. Her shift had been grueling, filled with the kind of trauma cases that usually made the news, and her hands were dry from scrubbing them with harsh soap. She walked toward the employee parking lot, her head down against the wind. She did not notice the man standing near the entrance until he stepped into her path. "Miss Lane?" Emma stopped, her heart jumping into her throat. She gripped her purse strap, ready to run or scream. The man held up a hand in a placating gesture. He was older, with a weary face and a trench coat that had seen better days. He didn't look like a gangster. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. "Detective Cole," he said, flashing a badge that looked heavy in his palm. "Harborview PD, Organized Crime Division. Can I have a minute?" Emma hesitated. "I am tired. Detective, I just want to go home." "Home," Cole repeated, a dry, humorless sound. "You mean the condo on Fifth Avenue? The one owned by a shell corporation traced back to Adrian Russo?" Emma went still. The air around them felt suddenly very cold. "I do not know what you are talking about," she lied, though her voice lacked conviction. Cole sighed. He reached into his coat pocket. Emma flinched, but he only pulled out a manila envelope. "He's not who you think he is." "Emma," Cole said softly, "I know he can be charming. I know he plays the role of the benevolent businessman, but you need to see the reality." He held the envelope out. Emma didn't want to take it. She wanted to walk away, get in her car, and drive back to the safety of the glass tower. But her hand moved on its own. She took the envelope and opened the flap. Inside were photographs. They were not forensic gore, which she saw every day in the ER. They were worse. They were pictures of aftermaths. A weeping mother holding a framed photo of a teenager, a shopkeeper standing in the ruins of a burned-out bakery, a body covered by a sheet, with only a hand visible, a hand wearing a wedding ring. "This is what he does," Cole said, his voice devoid of judgment, which made it hit harder. "Extortion, arson, murder, he is poison, Emma. And eventually, he will drag you down with him." Emma stared at the photo of the shopkeeper. She felt sick, a roiling nausea in her stomach. "Why are you showing me this?" she whispered. "Because we can help you," Cole said. "We have a safe house. We can get you into witness protection. If you tell us what you know, who comes to the condo, what phone calls you hear, where the money goes, we can give you a new life, a clean life." Emma shoved the photos back into the envelope and thrust it at his chest. "I have nothing to say to you," she said, her voice shaking. She pushed past him, walking fast toward her car. "Think about it," Cole called after her. "Before you become one of the pictures in my next file." Emma drove home in a daze. The city lights blurred into streaks of red and white. When she arrived at the condo, the security guard nodded at her, and the private elevator whisked her up to the 40th floor. But the sense of safety she usually felt was gone. Adrian was already home. He was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of pasta sauce, a glass of red wine on the counter, and he looked domestic, almost normal, except for the gun holster resting on the sideboard. "Hey," he said, turning to smile at her. "You are late. Rough shift." Emma didn't smile back. She couldn't. The image of the burned bakery was burned into her retinas. "It was fine," she said, her voice brittle. She walked past him into the bedroom to change. When she came back out, Adrian had plated the food. They sat at the small dining table, the city sprawling below them. Adrian tried to make conversation. He talked about a supplier issue, careful to use vague terms. He asked about the hospital. Emma gave one-word answers, staring at her fork, pushing the pasta around her plate. After 5 minutes of strained silence, Adrian set his glass down with a sharp click. "Okay," he said. "Stop." Emma looked up, startled. "You haven't looked me in the eye since you walked through the door," Adrian said. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp, scanning her face with terrifying precision. "You are pale. Your hands are shaking. What happened?" "Nothing," Emma said, reaching for her water. "Do not lie to me," Adrian said. "The temperature in the room dropped. I know you." "Emma, did something happen at the hospital? Did someone threaten you?" "No," she said. "Then what?" Emma looked at him. She looked at the handsome face, the strong hands that had held her so gently the night before, and she tried to overlay it with the monster Detective Cole had described. The two images wouldn't fit. The cognitive dissonance was tearing her apart. "A detective spoke to me today," she admitted quietly. Adrian went very still. "A detective? Who?" "Cole," she said. Adrian let out a short, bitter laugh. "Cole? Of course. And let me guess. He showed you his little scrapbook of horrors? He told you I am the devil and he is the savior? He showed me victims. Adrian, Emma said, her voice rising. Real people. People whose lives were ruined, and you believed him. Adrian accused. His eyes flashed with something that looked like anger, but Emma knew him well enough now to see the hurt underneath. It was the defensive crouch of a man expecting rejection. I saw the photos, Emma cried, standing up. I cannot just ignore that. I spend my life trying to save people, and you... I do what is necessary, Adrian said, standing up to meet her. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. I protect my own. I protect this city from people like Varela who would burn it to the ground just to see the sparks. By burning it down yourself? Emma shouted. Is that what you think I am? Adrian demanded. A monster? After everything? After I let you in? After I showed you who I really am? I do not know who you really are, Emma yelled back, tears stinging her eyes. I know the man who holds me at night, but I do not know the man on the news. And I do not know how to be in love with both of them. The silence that followed was deafening. The admission hung in the air, the word love spoken in the same breath as fear. Adrian looked at her, his expression shattering for a fraction of a second before he walled it off. He looked devastatingly alone. If you want to leave, leave, he said, his voice low and dead. Go to Cole. Let him hide you. Emma looked at him, her chest heaving. Part of her wanted to run. Part of her wanted to cross the room and beg him to tell her it was all a lie. She did neither. She turned and walked into the guest bedroom, closing the door and locking it. She cried herself to sleep, listening to the silence from the other side of the wall. When she woke up the next morning, the condo was empty. The silence was absolute. Emma walked into the kitchen, her eyes swollen and gritty. The gun holster was gone from the sideboard. There was a note on the counter, written on heavy cardstock in Adrian's sharp, angular handwriting. I am handling things. Stay inside. Do not open the door for anyone but Marco. Panic flared in Emma's chest. Handling things. What did that mean? Was he going to hurt Cole? Was he going to launch an attack on Varela? She spent the day pacing the apartment, calling his phone, which went straight to voicemail. By late afternoon, the anxiety was unbearable. She had a shift at the hospital starting at 6. Marco wasn't answering either. I cannot stay here, she told the empty room. She grabbed her bag and took the elevator down. The security guard in the lobby tried to stop her, telling her Mr. Russo had left instructions, but Emma flashed her hospital ID and insisted she had an emergency shift. She needed to be somewhere normal. She needed to work. She drove to the hospital, constantly checking her rearview mirror. The streets seemed quiet, too quiet. Her shift was a blur. She functioned on autopilot, checking vitals and dispensing meds, but her mind was entirely on the note on her counter. At midnight, she clocked out. The employee parking garage was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights buzzing like trapped insects. Emma walked quickly to her car, her keys laced between her fingers, a trick Adrian had taught her. She unlocked the door and reached for the handle. A van screeched around the corner, its tires squealing on the concrete. Emma spun around, but she was too slow. The side door of the van slid open and 2 men jumped out. They wore ski masks and dark tactical gear. Hey, Emma shouted, backing up against her car. One of the men lunged. Emma swung her bag, hitting him in the shoulder, but he didn't even flinch. He grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back with efficient brutality. Get off me, she screamed, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. The second man clamped a gloved hand over her mouth, stifling her cry. They dragged her toward the open door of the van. Emma kicked and struggled, catching one of them in the shin, but they were too strong. They threw her inside onto the metal floor. The door slammed shut, plunging her into darkness. The van accelerated, throwing her against the wall. Adrian, she thought, a single, desperate prayer as the vehicle sped into the night. The drive took 20 minutes. Emma didn't cry. She forced herself to breathe, counting the turns, trying to memorize the route, just as Adrian had once told her to do if she was ever taken. Don't panic. Panic kills. Observe. The van stopped. The doors opened, and she was hauled out into a large, cavernous space. It smelled of rust, damp rot, and old oil, an abandoned warehouse. They dragged her to the center of the room and shoved her into a metal chair. One of the men zip-tied her wrists behind her back, tight enough to cut off circulation, and then secured her ankles to the chair legs. Only then did a figure step out of the shadows. He was not tall, but he carried himself with a swagger that made him seem larger. He wore a white suit that looked garish against the grime of the warehouse. His face was pockmarked, his eyes bright with a cruel intelligence. Ricardo Varela. He walked a slow circle around her, inspecting her like livestock. "So," he said, his voice oily and smooth. "This is the weakness." He stopped in front of her, leaning down so his face was inches from hers. He smelled of cheap cologne and sweat. "You are prettier than the photos." "Nurse," he said. Emma stared at him, keeping her face blank. "Where is Adrian?" Ricardo laughed. "Oh, he is coming. Do not worry about that. He will come running." He straightened up, lighting a cigarette. "You see," he continued, blowing smoke toward the high ceiling, "Adrian took something that belonged to me, a shipment. Very expensive, very important. He thought he could just squeeze me out, disrespect me." He looked back at Emma, his eyes hardening. "So, I'm going to take something of his. They say you are his heart." He smiled, a jagged expression showing gold-capped teeth. "I am going to rip his heart out, and then I am going to make him trade his life for yours. A fair exchange, no?" He turned to his men. "Watch her. If she makes a sound, gag her. If she tries to run, break her legs." Ricardo walked away into the shadows of the office overlooking the warehouse floor, across the city, in the back room of La Notte. The air was freezing. Adrian stood by the table, staring at the phone Marco had just handed him. The message had been simple. A photo of Emma's car in the parking garage, door open, purse on the ground. And an address. The men in the room, Marco, and 6 of the toughest enforcers in the city, were vibrating with rage. They were checking weapons, loading magazines with a clatter of steel. "We hit them now," Marco said, slamming a clip into his pistol. "We burn the place down. We kill every single one of them." "No," Adrian said. The word was not a shout, it was a whisper, but it sucked the oxygen out of the room. Marco stopped. "Boss, they have her. If we go in, guns blazing," Adrian said, turning to face them, "Ricardo will put a bullet in her head before we even breach the door. He wants a war. He wants me to lose control." Adrian's face was a mask of terrifying calm. The anger was there. Deep in his eyes, a cold blue flame that burned hotter than any fire. But his hands were steady. "We do not storm the front," Adrian said. "We surgical strike. I know that warehouse. It used to belong to the dock workers union. There is a drainage tunnel that comes up in the sub-basement." He looked at Marco. "You take the team to the front, make noise, lots of noise. Draw their eyes, make them think I am coming through the front door with an army." "And you?" Marco asked. "I am going in alone through the back," Adrian said. "I am going to get her. And then—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The promise of violence in his silence was absolute. Back in the warehouse. The silence stretched. Emma's shoulders ached, her wrists burned, but her mind was racing. There were 2 guards left on the floor. One was older, sitting on a crate reading a magazine. The other was young, maybe barely 20, pacing nervously near the back exit. He kept glancing at Emma, then looking away. Emma took a deep breath. "Humanize yourself," Adrian had told her once, during a late-night conversation about hostages. "Don't be an object. Be a person." "Hey," she whispered. The young guard jumped. He looked at the older man, who ignored him, then walked slowly toward Emma. "Shut up," he hissed. "You are not supposed to talk." "My hands," Emma said, keeping her voice low and pitiful. "The ties are cutting my skin. Please, just loosen them a little. I am not going anywhere." The guard looked at her wrists. They were indeed turning purple. He hesitated. He wasn't a killer yet. He was just a kid in a gang. "I can't," he said, but his voice wavered. "Ricardo would kill me." "You do not look like them," Emma said softly. "You look smart. Too smart to be here." The guard blinked. He looked around the warehouse, his eyes lingering on the dark corners. "I didn't know he was going to take a woman," the kid muttered. That wasn't the deal. It is okay, Emma said. Just, I am thirsty. Is there any water? The kid looked at the older guard again. Wait here, he whispered. He walked toward a utility sink in the corner. As he moved, Emma watched his path. He skirted a pile of crates, revealing a heavy metal door with a red exit sign above it. The light on the sign was broken, but the bar across the door looked rusted. The kid came back with a dirty cup of water. He held it to her lips. As she drank, she looked past him. Is that the only way out? She asked innocently, nodding toward the main bay doors. If the police come... There is a service door in the back, the kid whispered, leaning close. But it is jammed. We checked it. Only opens from the outside if you have a crowbar. Emma's heart skipped a beat. A jammed door meant it wasn't being watched closely. It meant a blind spot. Thank you, she whispered. The kid pulled the cup away and stepped back, looking guilty for showing kindness. She closed her eyes, visualizing the layout. Main doors heavily guarded, office on the mezzanine, kid near her, back door jammed. She took a breath, slowing her heart rate. She didn't know if Adrian was coming. She didn't know if he was still angry, or if he had written her off to save his empire. But then she remembered his finger tracing her pulse. This is where you tremble. He was coming. She knew it with a certainty that defied logic. And when he got here, she had to be ready. She began to twist her wrists, testing the give of the plastic ties, ignoring the pain as the plastic bit into her skin. She would not be a damsel. She would be his partner. Part 6. Darkness had settled over the industrial district of Harborview like a heavy, suffocating shroud. The abandoned warehouse stood like a rotting tooth against the skyline, its windows shattered and its corrugated metal walls groaning in the wind coming off the harbor. Adrian Russo crouched in the shadows of a drainage ditch 200 yards from the perimeter. The mud was cold, seeping through the knees of his tactical trousers, but he did not feel it. He felt nothing but a cold, crystalline focus that narrowed his entire world down to a single objective. Get her out. Beside him, Marco checked his watch. It is time, boss, Marco whispered. Adrian nodded once. Give them hell. Marco signaled to the team positioned near the main gates. Seconds later, the night was torn apart by a deafening explosion. A car rigged with flashbangs and smoke grenades detonated near the front entrance, sending a plume of white smoke billowing into the air. Immediately, gunfire erupted, controlled bursts fired into the air and against the metal siding of the warehouse to simulate a full-scale assault. Inside the warehouse, chaos took hold instantly. Shouts echoed from the catwalks. The heavy thud of boots on metal rang out as Varella's men rushed toward the front, drawn like moths to the fire. Adrian did not watch them go. He turned and slipped into the darkness of the service tunnel he had scouted years ago when this building was part of his legitimate shipping routes. He moved with the silence of a ghost, picking the lock on the rusted service door with hands that were steady despite the terror beating against his ribs. Inside the cavernous main room, Emma Lane was jolted from her stupor by the explosion. The sound was thunderous, vibrating through the metal chair she was tied to. She looked up, her heart hammering against her sternum. The warehouse, which had been quiet and menacing only moments before, was now a hive of panicked activity. She saw Ricardo Varela shouting orders from the mezzanine, waving a pistol. Men were running toward the bay doors, weapons drawn. Left alone in the center of the floor was the young guard, the kid who had given her water. He was looking toward the front entrance, his eyes wide with fear, his weapon shaking in his hands. He was distracted. Emma knew this was her only chance. Adrian was here. She knew it in her bones, but if she stayed in this chair, she was nothing but a hostage to be used against him. She let out a choked, gargling sound and slumped forward in her chair, letting her head hit her chest. "Hey!" the kid shouted, looking back at her. Emma didn't answer. She let her body go limp, sliding dangerously to the side as if she had lost consciousness. "Help!" she wheezed, the word barely audible. "Can't breathe." The kid hesitated. He looked at the chaos at the front of the warehouse, then back at the woman dying in the chair. His basic humanity won out over his orders. He ran to her. "Miss?" he asked, dropping to one knee beside her. "Hey, wake up." He reached out to check her pulse, leaning in close. Emma opened her eyes. The fear was gone, replaced by a desperate, feral will to survive. She slammed her forehead into his nose. It wasn't a professional strike, but it was fueled by adrenaline. The kid yelled in pain, reeling back, blood spurting from his nose. He lost his balance and fell onto his backside. Emma didn't wait. She threw her weight sideways, tipping the chair over. She crashed to the concrete floor, the impact jarring her shoulder, but she ignored the pain. She scrambled awkwardly, twisting her body until her bound hands could reach the kid's belt. He was still clutching his face, blinded by pain. Emma's fingers found the handle of the hunting knife she had seen earlier. She ripped it from the sheath. "Hey!" he shouted, scrambling to grab her. Emma rolled onto her back, kicking out with both legs, her heel connected with his chest, knocking the wind out of him. She scurried backward, crab-walking against the floor until she found a sharp edge on a metal support beam. She pinned the handle of the knife between her knees and sawed the zip ties against the blade. One strand snapped, then the second eye. Her hands tore free. Emma scrambled to her feet. She didn't look back at the guard. She ran. She ducked into the maze of crates and machinery, heading away from the noise of the firefight. The warehouse was a labyrinth of shadows. She could hear the rhythmic popping of gunfire getting louder, but she couldn't tell who was winning. She turned a corner into a long, dimly lit corridor that smelled of mold. She pressed her back against the wall, trying to catch her breath, her eyes scanning the darkness for an exit. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the gloom at the far end of the hallway. Emma gasped, shrinking back. The figure raised a gun, moving with lethal precision. The silhouette was broad, familiar. "Adrian?" she whispered, stepping into the sliver of light cast by a broken fixture. The man froze. He lowered the weapon instantly. Emma. The name was a ragged exhale. Adrian closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He didn't stop to check for enemies. He holstered his weapon and crashed into her, wrapping his arms around her with a force that nearly lifted her off her feet. Emma buried her face in his neck, clutching his tactical vest. She was shaking uncontrollably now that the immediate danger was paused. "I thought you were dead." She sobbed against his chest. "I thought he killed you." "I am here," Adrian murmured, pressing his face into her hair. His hands were running over her back, her arms, checking for injuries. I have you. He pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands. His eyes were wild, dilated with adrenaline, but focused entirely on her. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "No," she said, breathless. "Just bruises. I escaped." He looked at her with a fierce pride that burned brighter than the anger. "Of course you did. We have to go," he said, grabbing her hand. "The back exit is 30 feet that way. My car is waiting." They turned to run, but a voice echoed from the darkness behind them, freezing the blood in Emma's veins. "Leaving so soon?" They spun around. Ricardo Varela stepped out from behind a stack of shipping pallets. He was not alone. 3 of his men flanked him, their submachine guns raised and leveled at Adrian's chest. Ricardo was smiling, but it was a tight, manic grimace. His white suit was stained with soot. "I knew you would come the back way, Russo." Ricardo sneered. "You always were a predictable rat." Adrian stepped in front of Emma, shielding her with his body. He didn't reach for his gun. At this range, with 3 barrels pointed at them, it would be suicide. "Let her go, Ricardo," Adrian said, his voice deadly calm. "This is between you and me." "Oh, no," Ricardo laughed, stepping closer. "This is between me, you, and the thing you love." He raised his own pistol and pointed it directly at Emma, leaning around Adrian's shoulder to seek his target. "Move, Russo," Ricardo ordered, "or I put a bullet in her lung. I want to watch her bleed out while you watch." Adrian went rigid. He looked at the guns. He looked at Ricardo's manic eyes. He calculated the odds and found them at 0. "Okay," Adrian said. He slowly raised his hands. "I surrender," Adrian said loudly. "I am unarmed." He reached down with 2 fingers and unclipped his holster, letting it drop to the concrete floor with a heavy clatter. He kicked it toward Ricardo. "Let her walk out the door," Adrian said, his voice thick with emotion. and you can have me. Do whatever you want. Cut me up. Burn me. Just let her go." Ricardo's smile widened. A trade. The king of Harborview for the nurse. Emma grabbed Adrian's arm. Her fingers dug into his bicep. "No," she hissed. "No. Adrian, go. Emma," Adrian said without looking at her. "Walk out the door. Do not look back. I am not leaving you," she cried, her voice echoing in the corridor. "I am not going to be the reason you die. If you stay, I stay." Ricardo laughed, a harsh, barking sound. How touching. Romeo and Juliet. "Fine. I will kill you both." He tightened his finger on the trigger, aiming at Adrian's chest. At that exact second, the metal door behind Ricardo exploded inward. Marco had flanked the building. Flashbangs rolled across the floor, detonating with a blinding white light and a concussive boom that shattered the stalemate. Ricardo flinched, turning his head instinctively away from the glare. It was the only opening they needed. Adrian didn't dive for cover. He dove for Ricardo. At the same moment, Emma saw Ricardo's gun swing back toward Adrian. She didn't think. She screamed and threw her body weight against Ricardo's arm, tackling him from the side. The gun went off, the bullet sparking harmlessly against the concrete ceiling as her impact spoiled his aim. Ricardo shouted in fury, backhanding Emma, sending her sprawling to the floor. But the delay cost him everything. Adrian was on him. It was a blur of violence. Adrian slammed Ricardo against the wall, the force of the impact cracking the plaster. He wrenched the gun from Ricardo's hand and tossed it aside. Ricardo tried to draw a knife, but Adrian caught his wrist, twisting it with a sickening snap. Ricardo crumpled to his knees, wheezing, around them. The firefight was short and brutal. Marco and his team swept the hallway, neutralizing Ricardo's guards with professional efficiency. Within 10 seconds, the corridor was silent except for the ringing in Emma's ears. Adrian stood over Ricardo. He picked up the gun from the floor. He leveled it at Ricardo's head. Ricardo looked up, blood streaming from his nose, his eyes filled with hate. "Do it," he spat. "Finish it." Adrian's finger tightened on the trigger. His chest was heaving. Every instinct he had honed over 20 years of criminal life screamed at him to pull the trigger, to end the threat, to take revenge for the terror in Emma's eyes. Emma scrambled to her feet. She didn't look at the dead men. She looked at Adrian. "Adrian," she whispered. Adrian froze. He looked at Ricardo, trembling on the floor. Then he looked at Emma. She was bruised, dirty, and terrified, but she was looking at him with a plea that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with his soul. She didn't want to kill her. Adrian exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. The fire in his eyes died down, replaced by a cold, weary resolve. "No," Adrian said. He lowered the gun. "I am done," he said to Ricardo. "And so are you." He turned to Marco. "Tie him up. Leave him for the cops." Marco looked shocked. "Boss, he will talk. He will ruin us." "Let him talk," Adrian said. "We are leaving." He walked over to Emma. He didn't say a word. He just wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her into his side, and walked her toward the exit. They stepped out into the cool night air, leaving the violence and the burning warehouse behind them. The interrogation room at the Harborview Police Precinct was gray and smelled of stale coffee. Detective Cole sat on one side of the metal table. Adrian Russo sat on the other. Emma stood by the observation glass, watching. "You know I can put you away for 20 years, Cole said, tapping a file on the table. "Even with you handing us Varela on a silver platter, you're not innocent." "Russo, I never claimed to be," Adrian said calmly. He was still wearing his tactical vest, though it was now unzipped. He looked tired, but lighter somehow. "Here is the deal," Adrian said. "I give you everything. The routes, the ledgers, the names of the politicians on the payroll. I dismantle my entire operation. You get the biggest bust in the history of the city. And in exchange," Cole asked, "immunity for my lower-level staff. They were just following orders. And for me, house arrest, probation, whatever you call it, but no prison time." Cole laughed incredulously. "You think you can just walk away?" "I am not walking away," Adrian said. "I am burning the bridge. I am offering you the end of organized crime in Harborview. Take it or leave it." Cole looked at Adrian. Then he looked through the glass at Emma. He saw the way Adrian's eyes flickered toward her. Even now, Cole sighed. He opened his folder. "Start talking," he said. 6 months later, the apartment was on the 4th floor of a brownstone in the quieter, residential part of the city. It had no doorman, no security cameras, just a regular lock and a potted fern in the hallway that Emma kept forgetting to water. It was small. The kitchen counters were laminate, not granite. The view was of a park, not the skyline. Emma loved it. She walked in the front door, carrying a bag of groceries. "I am home," she called out. Adrian was in the living room, sitting on the floor surrounded by paperwork. He was wearing reading glasses and a sweater, a look that still made Emma smile every time she saw it. He was currently navigating the nightmare of legitimate tax law for his new venture, a consulting firm for logistics and security. He looked up, pulling the glasses off his nose. "Hey," he said, his face lighting up. He stood and walked over to take the bag from her. He kissed her, a simple, domestic peck on the lips. "How was the clinic?" he asked. "Busy," Emma said, kicking off her shoes. "We had a flu outbreak, but good busy. Honest busy." They made dinner together, pasta with jarred sauce, because neither of them felt like cooking from scratch. They ate on the couch, watching a bad reality show, their legs tangled together under a throw blanket. The ankle monitor on Adrian's leg blinked silently, a reminder of the constraints he lived under, but also a badge of the freedom he had chosen. He was not a king anymore. He was just a man. After dinner, the apartment grew quiet. The city outside was a distant hum, no longer a threat. They lay back on the couch. Emma rested her head on his shoulder, her hand flat against his chest. Adrian's arm was draped around her, his fingers idly playing with the hem of her shirt. He shifted slightly, turning so he could look at her. He began to trace lazy, soothing circles with his fingertips over her chest, just above her heart, feeling the steady rhythm beneath the fabric. He felt her heart rate pick up. Just a little, a flutter, a skip. Emma laughed softly, a warm, vibrating sound against his ribs. She swatted his hand gently. "Don't touch me there," she whispered playfully, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Adrian smiled. It wasn't the shark-like smile of the nightclub owner, nor the weary smile of the man in the warehouse. It was open. It was happy. He leaned in, brushing his lips against her forehead, then her cheek, before finding her mouth for a slow, deep kiss that tasted of tomato sauce and peace. He pulled back just an inch, his hand resting warm and heavy over her heart. "That is exactly where you tremble," he whispered. The words, once a statement of power and predatory observation, were now a confession of intimacy. He wasn't telling her he knew her fear. He was telling her he knew her love. Emma closed her eyes, resting her head back against his chest. She listened to the strong, steady thud of his heartbeat. It was a sound she had fought for, a sound she had almost died for. They didn't know what the next year would bring. The legal battles were far from over, and the world was still a difficult place. But as she lay there, safe in the arms of the man who had burned down his kingdom to build her a home, Emma knew one thing for certain: they would face it together. She squeezed his hand, and he squeezed back, an unbreakable promise in the quiet dark. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Writing the journey of Emma and Adrian has been an incredible ride, full of tension, danger, and the kind of love that requires sacrifice. I hope you enjoyed this 6-part saga as much as I enjoyed creating it for you. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below letting me know where in the world you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more passionate, emotional, and thrilling tales, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories. Don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in English in the comments section. Your support means the world and helps us bring more of these characters to life. Until next time, stay safe and keep believing in happy endings.